everyone who's come to this webinar on moral resilience for criminal justice workers during COVID-19. It's the sixth in a series that Volunteers of America has been hosting since the pandemic started for people who work in frontline ways whose work has been affected and changed by the pandemic. And so we asked them to reflect on the challenges they've faced, ways they've handled those challenges, things they're doing to take care of themselves during the crisis, and things that they've learned. So those are the sort of four questions we've posed for our panelists. If you want to participate in the conversation with them, ask them a question, make a comment, please use chat. We just have too many people to keep track of raised hands and all of that, but I will be myself hosting the chat space and watching for comments and questions and posing them at the end of the panel to the panelists and the respondent. And we have 5 panelists and a respondent today, all working in different ways in criminal justice work. So I'm really delighted that you're here with us. And the regular host, I'm not the regular host for these webinars, our regular host, Chaplain Al Boyce out of Volunteers of America's Northern New England affiliate, actually is recovering from COVID himself. We're glad that he's recovering. That was the best news we got this week. So he will be back for our next webinar, but he's missing today because he's still at home recovering. And I want to introduce our moderator for the panel, who is James Marshall. James just started his work in June with Volunteers of America as Director of Ministry, which means he manages the entire ministry work for Volunteers of America, both the education and ordination and other things for ministry and Volunteers of America. And since we're in 46 states with 38 affiliate offices, it's kind of a big job he took on in June, which I don't recommend trying to do in a pandemic, but it was a major thing that he did, making that transition, on top of which he had a newborn baby. So we're really delighted that he's with us and surviving this rather unusual start to a new job. And so I'm going to turn it over to James, and he will be moderating a panel, and I'll see you later during the question and answer time.
Thank you, Dr. Brock. And as I always say, I try to keep my coffee nearby because it is certainly a lot to be able to manage all of this with everything going. Well, welcome to our webinar series. I'm so delighted that each and every single one of you have joined us on today. We have a very, very special event for you today with some amazing panelists and dynamic respondent to the panel today, where you'll be able to get some great perspective on how those individuals in criminal justice work is weathering this pandemic and all of the other things that are plaguing our nation during this season. I'm going to give you a little brief bio of each one right before we give them some time to share. But if you want a more exhaustive bio of each of our panelists and even some information on maybe how you can connect with them personally, there'll be some information, a link in the chat that we'll post there where you can get more information about each panelist in a more detailed way. But I'm so excited today about all these panelists who are sacrificing time out of their busy schedules to give us a little wisdom and insight on how things are going in the work of criminal justice in the midst of everything that's taking place in our nation right now. Our first panelist, and we're basically going to go in the order in which they're presented on our promotional material. But our first panelist is none other than Miss LaToshia Butler. I know her very well. She is completing her doctorate degree at George Mason University, and her doctorate degree is in criminal justice and criminology. And so we're so excited to have her today. Her passion for serving the community of individuals who were formerly incarcerated has led her to a position at the Court Services and Defender Supervision Agency in Washington, D.C., where she continues to develop community supervision plans for probationers and parolees, and she provides a level of mediation support and guidance to victims of domestic violence. So excited to have you today, LaToshia. How are you? And you can unmute yourself. And we're gonna just let you kind of share. You know, we have 4 questions that we're posing to all the panelists, so you'll kind of, you know, be our trailblazer today and lead the way. But what we wanna know from you is, what are the biggest challenges during the pandemic created for criminal justice work, for yourself and maybe others inside of this work field? How do you cope with these challenges? And what do you do personally for self-care during this season? And if you can share, you know, what you've learned over the past 6 months about your work, about how we can serve those who have been previously incarcerated during this season. Thank you so much for being a part of our panel today.
Thank you so much for having me. And at first I want to say these are great questions. I was so excited to be presented with these questions because they allow me to sit back and really think and ponder about what the last 6 months of my life have been like and how much of a transition this has been for me. So I will say I will be speaking, one, from a practitioner of the field perspective, but also as a person who supports academia and the progression of higher levels of education, how all of those areas really of my life were impacted. So first, as you stated, I am a PhD student. I'm actually moving forward with my dissertation proposal defense within the next few weeks. So fingers crossed.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But in addition to that, I actually work at a federal parole and probation agency within the District of Columbia. I started off as a federal PO, did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I transitioned into a position in the office of the director, where actually my job is to leverage resources for clients or those formerly incarcerated within the city. So we're talking housing, education, employment, regaining some citizenship rights that they once lost. We're thinking your voting rights, census rights, all of those issues were all the part of the jobs that I have to do. And then COVID-19 happened. So really, when it comes to providing resources to those formerly incarcerated, it was impacted with the work that we do. I'm sorry, I just noticed my video stopped. I'll continue. We went from, one, having face-to-face meetings with not only clients of the supervision agency, but also that intergovernmental agency community support where we could collaborate with churches, we could collaborate with other district and federal agencies. So that all stopped. And a one-way ticket of, oh, you need this resource, just give me a phone call this person, reach out to this person. It all stopped with the pandemic because there was an issue with connecting people. Transit stopped, everything stopped. Our way of business stopped, operating hours stopped. When you think about really the digital age gap where everything, even now we went to this digital platform where we have to communicate via Zoom or WebEx or a WhatsApp app. When you think about those who return from incarceration and come home, how many of them really have the access to the internet like we all have? Cable like we all have? Cell phones like we all have. And so when you really think about what the pandemic did, it literally let us see we've been connecting with people so easily before, but when we really tap into what people really need, the pandemic showed us the need for resources for returning citizens is there. Now more than ever, when you hear about the unemployment gap, of course that affected everyone, but it definitely affected our returning citizen population. Those who are already plagued with having issues with getting jobs now can't get a job because no one else is hiring, because the entire world is stopped. Even as it relates to myself in academia, I was once in class. So even persons who want to pursue a career in criminal justice, you were once sitting in a classroom having that face-to-face connection with your cohort. If you're in a master's or dissertation program with your professors, you had that readily access to them. And now the pandemic has happened. It's a complete switch. Luckily for most of us, universities moved to online transition. But for some of us, even myself, I had to learn online transition. I've never taken an online class. All of my degrees from the University of Maryland, American, and now at George Mason, I've had in-class instruction. I have a learning curve when it comes to online classes. So it's even me transitioning with that and learning how to adapt with that and balance that personal life, work life, and then school life workload, as well as wanting to assist people in the position that I have where my job is to connect people to resources, garnering resources for myself, family and friends, but also for the clientele that we serve. And so I think this has really highlighted what the criminal justice system could possibly look like from 2020 moving forward? How have we, justice organizations, been able to interact, connect with each other, and have the process of business moving forward if our true and ultimate goal is to rehabilitate people and return them into society? How can we do that if something like this is happening and we still need to keep business moving forward? I know, at least with the District of Columbia, the court system had stopped at one point, but now we're doing courts online. With probation, we no longer see persons in the office. However, we do have to connect with them whichever way really we can, either in the community, which of course during this pandemic is sometimes unfortunate and it calls for health concern, via telephone, via Zoom or webinar, whatever type of platform we can, because there is still a need to address the concern of rehabilitating people and bringing them safely and securely back into society. So I think it's really caused us to understand and value the work that we do and try to, as best as we can, bridge the gaps within each other of how we can connect organizations, but still continue the flow of business and helping to recuperate and provide people the benefits that they need to move forward. How have I been able to cope? Honestly, I think it turns into the third question that you asked, which is self-care. For me in my job, I've actually learned the benefit of connecting people via working groups. So I attend a lot of support groups for returning citizens. I attend a lot of working groups, violent crime working groups, women in reentry working groups, young adult justice involved individual working groups, where we invite people to come in, persons in the community, persons who are in their family and they were previously incarcerated, to call in. It's a phone call or a Zoom call. They have the option, but ask us, where can I get these resources? How can I connect my loved one or my family member to the resource that we need, so we can actually make that direct appointment to them? I've also worked with my agency of creating what we call a resource responsivity guide, where literally we contacted various District of Columbia agencies as well as community organizations, and we asked them to provide us their email, their address, and their hours of operation. We sent out mass emails to returning citizens to let them know, although the pandemic is still going on, there are certain resources that you can connect with and interventions you can connect with in the community that can help you and still assist you during this time of transition with the pandemic going on. In addition to that, we've also utilized the virtual platforms that have been available to us, Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Meetings, where we are able to connect with clients and provide them telehealth resources. So for our clients who were once attending self-help groups for domestic violence or parenting or coping mechanisms for trauma, all of those groups have now gone digital. So we've all just transferred them onto this platform. Of course, yes, we're addressing the issue of the digital gap between communities, but we've been connecting with DC libraries. We've been connecting with the Department of Employment Services, all various agencies to come together to provide these resources in this gap and this need, to try to move forward in a way that we're coping and bringing people together and still moving forward in the field. For myself personally, I'm an advocate of couch time. I call it therapy couch time. So I do attend therapy once a week, but I think it's also allowed me to understand the importance of just solidifying time and compartmentalizing things in certain areas of my life. So school, you do it at one time. Work, you do it from 9 to 5. Then you need to prioritize time for your family. You need to prioritize time to check in with one another, to do your online Zumba, to pick up a book club. I even just told a friend, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't read a good book in so long. I reached out to my department and we've started a social justice book club. With everything that's been going on in the media, I said, why not? We have this time, we can't travel like we want, we can't go where we want, but how can we maximize this time to really maximize what we love, what we think about? So for me, if you have heard anything about my degrees, from Maryland to American to George Mason, I just studied criminology. I love the criminal justice system. I'm a geek in that way. It's just what I've been doing. But for me, it's really just staying abreast on what's going on with the news, seeing how things are transitioning, tapping into those things and understanding, this is where we are now, but planning ahead. What will next year look like? What can I do for myself to positively use this time to maximize the experience? And last but not least, I think you said what I've learned over the last 6 months. Literally, as it relates to being a student, a practitioner of the criminal justice system and everything that I've had, I think I've learned the importance and value of human connection. I think when I started working in the criminal justice system as a federal parole and probation officer, I did not understand the importance of having that one-on-one connecting dialogue with my clients. Now more than ever, I understand that it is so important for us to remember and tap into the humanity of the situation. We have now been reduced really to just communicating via virtually or on the phone. But when you're actually talking about connecting with people in the criminal justice system and working to help them rehabilitate and come back into society, it's really a human on human connection. Because what the pandemic has shown us is anything can happen and we can all be put in the same situation. But having that one-on-one dialogue with someone where you can connect, where you can meet them at their home or at their job, see how they're doing. They ask you how you're doing. I tell a lot of people, a lot of times people think probation is a one-sided thing, but sometimes, fortunately or unfortunately, you may have someone on your caseload for years. So you get to watch and see progression. I even had clients who've even messaged me and said, you know, Ms. Butler, did you get your degree yet? Are you finished with school? That's because we had that rapport and dialogue when I used to see them in the office. They knew I was in school. We would talk. Just like I have to talk to hypothetical Mr. Johnson and see how you're doing with work, you want to know how I'm doing with school. And I think, if anything, these last 6 months have taught me the importance of really valuing what we have when we are able to connect with people, regardless of background, regardless of how diverse we are. There's something that really has tapped into the humanity, because we've lost a lot of people during the pandemic. And it's shown us a lot of the things that we need to do to bridge gaps and to bring each other together. I think, if anything, it has highlighted the importance that we have in human connection and just being connected with each other.
Ms. Butler, thank you so much. I mean, everything you said is really spot on. And, you know, it's unfortunate that seasons like this really begin to expose how important it is for us to make sure that we're working hard to make sure that those who are returning from incarceration have resources. Because as you mentioned, you know, during times like this, it's really difficult for us to be able to have that human connection. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing as far as bringing groups together at your job to really just have some time together, doing book clubs and things like that. Because it's important that those of us who are in this kind of space of work hold one another up. Thank you so much for, again, giving us those wisdoms, those nuggets, those insights on our webinar on today. But we're going to move forward to Dr. Brendan Ozawa-de Silva, who is the Associate Director for C. And C is an acronym. C Learning Center is an acronym for Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning. And it's at the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University. And he has a whole litany of amazing work that he has been doing over the years, degrees, and just really helping education in this space of criminal justice and the work that we're doing. We're so honored to have you today, Dr. Ozawa-de Silva, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, or I'm close at least, but thank you so much. Now, you know, our question for you is similar to the last question. What are the biggest challenges that in your space of this work, the pandemic has created for you, and how do you cope with them? And, you know, most importantly, what do you do for self-care? And what are some of the lessons that you've learned over the past 6 months that you can help us all with as we continue to serve this population of people? It's such an honor to have you on our webinar and our panel today.
Thanks so much, James, for the kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to meet you and the fellow panelists. And thank you for the invitation to be here with all of you today. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned, so I have a background in higher education in prison. I helped set up a program here in Georgia. It's the only college degree program for incarcerated women here in the state. It's called the Shalon Project. And I'm now on a national organization called the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison, which is the first national organization to support college and prison programs. So that's where I connect to this work. But as you mentioned, in my day job is actually working on an international education program, which is a trauma-informed education program. So to respond to your question, since I work a lot with educators and kids, I like to do things very experientially. So if you don't mind, I'd like to show you how I do those questions rather than just talking.
Please do.
So thanks, James. So what I'd like to invite everybody who's comfortable doing this with me is there's so many things that have been canceled because of COVID-19. And we can easily focus on the things the problems and focus on the difficulties and everything we can't do. But there are, of course, still lots of things we can do. And when we shift our focus to that, it can change our mindset. It can even change the way our body responds to our situation. So what I'd like to invite everybody to do is to start by thinking of something that has been helping you get by this past few days, the past few weeks, the past few months. And if you don't mind sharing that in the chat, something that has been helping you get by, it can be something that's been a source of strength, something that's been uplifting, something that's been comforting. It could be a person, it could be an activity, it could be a thought, it could be real or imaginary. And if you don't, most people are already doing it, it's great. Since you're on video and voice, James, does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah. You know, the first thing that popped into mind for me is Dr. Brock mentioned, I have a newborn son, he's 3 months. And, you know, when I'm really stressed out and I get the chance to run by and just see his smile, it really does help me to, you know, build a level of resilience, if you would, to push through everything that's going on. So I put that in the chat, my newborn's smile.
Your newborn, it's a son, right?
It's a son. Yep, my newborn son's smile.
What is his name, James, if you don't mind?
His name is James. Also, he's the fifth. So,
James Jr.
Yeah.
That's great. I want to ask you, James, if you don't mind my asking you.
No, not
when you think about your newborn son, his smile, and I noticed you were smiling as you're sharing that. Do you notice anything happen in your body as you think of him?
You know, when I think about it, I feel an inner sense of calm and peace. You know, I sometimes when I see that, you know, it forces me to kind of take a deep breath for a moment, like, wow, you know, I was involved in this somehow, right? And so it gives me a moment to kind of slow down, because I'm moving so fast from thing to thing, webinar, meeting, this and that, Zoom call, but it forces me to kind of stop, slow down, take a deep breath, and get that inner sense of peace. I never paid attention to it until you asked that question, but that is something that happens in that moment.
That's great. I'm so grateful to you for sharing that and for modeling it for us, because I noticed that as you shared that and as you talked about the effect it has on your body, the inner sense of peace, taking a deep breath, I responded to that myself, and I noticed my body responding. And your face, even now, you know, moments later, you look happier, you look more at ease. Not that you didn't look that way before, but it's just like radiating, the joy and happiness just radiating out of you. And you used a word that I want to focus on, resilience. And I wonder whether people in the chat, you know, people who are watching also felt that from you. I wouldn't be surprised if some did. So what this shows, and people are putting great things in the chat. I wish I could read them all, but immersing myself in nature, dinners with my family, reading, just read a few, writing poetry, walks with my dog, grandchildren, family. These are all resources for us. And we can, you know, we have this amazing ability to refocus and to not just look at the bad things, but also look at the strengths. It's not that we should ignore the bad things and the challenges, of course not, but we can take moments to remember the sources of strength and then actually see how our body responds to that. Because that really helps us connect with our innate resilience, which is not just mental, but physical and physiological. Because as we, you know, look at all the dangers out there, it's not just our mind that gets concerned. Our body, we have this evolved survival mechanism, and our body feels threat, and we feel stress, and we know about the chemicals that it releases. We know about the fight or flight. And if we build up too much stress, this can affect our decision-making, it can affect our health, and it affects the people around us. Whereas the opposite happens when we tune into our sources of strength and resilience. We can actually not only feel that way in our body, but it even transmits to others. You know, and so we really have a responsibility, I think. I mean, this COVID for me, one thing I've learned about is that, you know, we often say that self-care and care for others are interlinked. And COVID's such a great metaphor for that, because protecting yourself by washing your hands, wearing a mask, social distancing, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting others too, right? And so we really see this connection between self-care and taking care of our emotional and mental state and our physical state and being resilient, tapping into our resilience is really a great way and gift for taking care of others. So thanks for letting me explore that experientially, James, with everybody. Thanks for everybody who contributed in the chat. The situation that I've been experiencing is a situation of moral injury. So I work with a lot of faculty, staff, and program directors across the country who run higher education and prison programs. Pretty much all those programs have been shut down, have been shuttered and suspended because of COVID. So staff and faculty are not able to go inside, and they're used to seeing their students. They're used to being with them. And so they feel helpless, they feel scared. We know that rates of COVID infection inside prisons are much higher than outside. A few states that have been tracking this well, like Ohio, say that there's a 9% rate of infection inside, it's only 1% outside. Family members often don't know whether their loved ones inside are getting infected. Their loved one might die, and they might only hear later that they even had COVID. There's a lot of lack of safety and resources on the inside. And so if we think about moral injury and vicarious trauma, there's a lot of that happening right now because our criminal justice system we have a situation of mass incarceration. We have a lot of problems already, and this is just added to that. If moral injury, as is defined on your website, Volunteers for America, it's the suffering we experience in high stakes situations when things go wrong and harm results that challenges our deepest moral codes and ability to trust in others and ourselves. Well, we're definitely seeing that happening. So what I've been trying to work with others is giving resources to people who work with incarcerated persons, and when possible, directly to incarcerated persons, around trauma awareness, resilience, and these type of simple practices, body-based practices that can help us get back into our resilient zone so we can do the best to get through this, because it's a very challenging situation. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources that are being shared out there. The Alliance for Higher Education in Prison has a COVID response resource page, which came together very early. And I'll paste the link in the chat in case people are interested. It has a lot of different resources, initiatives around release for incarcerated persons and safety, but also trauma-informed and resilience-informed practices that we can do on the outside, or that people on the inside can also do. These are body-based practices to get our body back into our resilience zone. And also we've been trying to, shift our perspective from a conventional perspective towards a resilience-based perspective. What does that mean? It means that rather than just looking at what's wrong and focusing solely on that, we also look at what's right. We look at what's going well. We look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers famously said. Because when we look for the helpers, we see that it's not just everything's going to hell in a handbasket. There are good people trying to do good things. And so we have reasons for hope. And that's really important. It's important that we have a sense of hope and a sense of agency during times like this, so we don't give in to hopelessness and helplessness. So the link that I provided there has a lot of these resources. I'm out of time, so I'll just end with one other simple practice, simple resource for dealing with stress, and is to look at colors. This sounds like a funny thing. Look at colors around the room. And everyone can try this right now. Just see if you like, you don't have to, but see if you can identify 4 or 5 colors around you. See if there are any colors that particularly stand out or that you like. And notice if anything happens on the inside of your body as you notice these colors. I actually have two little mugs here that are very bright green and blue, and I love them. So I look at that. There's interesting science behind why this works. When we get afraid, when our stress system activates, we tend to narrow in and not pay attention to what's around us. So just touching objects, noticing colors, listening for sounds actually breaks that pattern of dysregulation in our nervous system and helps us get back to the present moment. So these are the types of things that I do for self-care and that I'm sharing with others. Thank you so much for the time, James.
Oh, no, thank you, Dr. Brendan. This has been, really insightful as well as helpful. You helped me in that little moment to take a greater appreciation for the things that are going right. I never thought much about the connection of, some of the things that I may look at as, oh, that's small, but the connection it has on just, how I'm doing physically and how I am physically being resilient in the midst of this pandemic. I really appreciate your work and what you're doing, and also the special mention about how a lot of these programs have had to change because there is higher rates of infection inside these prison systems. And so it just puts another thing on our radar that we can continue to just begin to, send our faith and our well wishes to the resolve of this. So thank you so much for sharing today in your education. And I hope that everyone will take a moment to jump into the chat. Amazing resources that Dr. Brendan has shared with us on today that can continue to help you be resilient during this season. Our next panelist today, I'm really excited to have him with us. He's no stranger to us here at Volunteers of America. He's been doing a lot of work with our various initiatives that we've had. He's a great friend of Dr. Brock. Jacques Verdun is the founder and the director of the Guiding Rage into Power program, GRIP, at the Insight Out, a nonprofit that turns violence and suffering into opportunities for learning and healing for prisoners. Jacques has done a lot of work inside of prison systems and have seen so many amazing statistics from his programs inside of prison systems. You're even going to get a chance to hear from someone that he's had an opportunity to work with on today. But Jacques, it's such an honor to have you on with us today. And same as the other panelists, I want to know from you, what are the biggest challenges the pandemic has created for your work? How do you cope with them? What do you do for self-care? And what are some of the lessons that you have learned that you can share with us to give us further insight over the past 6 months of how things that you may have learned as it relates to your work? Such an honor to have you on our panel with us today, Jacques.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction, James, about my work and my person. It actually made me want to go to prison and take the program. Not really, of course. And certainly not right now, right? Some of you may have heard that San Quentin, which is one of the prisons we work in, was kind of like the Chernobyl of COVID, in the sense that we had 2,200 infections.
Wow.
And it really kind of has woke up the activist in me, because we had to beat the drum and ring the bell there, because it certainly in the beginning looked like there wasn't much appetite for outing to the press what was happening. So that's heavy, and a few of our students died, and it's always hard to talk to the family about that, of course. So it's been really intense, Our program is extremely oriented towards resocialization and reconnecting and having a format that we call a tribe rather than a program or a group. And I'm fond and known for this quote from the Navajo Indians, who speak of an offender as he or she who acts as if they have no relatives. And so you know, a lot of accountability emerges out of meaningful relationships. And so it's been hard to maintain that right now. However, what we've chosen to do is to revert back to the old art of letter writing, correspondence format. And since we work mostly with lifers, they actually are quite experienced in the art of correspondence. And they write beautiful letters in the midst of pretty heartbreaking circumstances. And so we have 25 people writing back, about 450 letters.
Oh, wow.
So, and the letters, of course, include assignments, and it's been so heartening to see the guys respond, you know, because the letters are being read, of course, by authorities, and almost all of them suffered COVID, and still, you know, they're standing up and writing back and say, you know, I want to be accountable, you know, I'm not my crime, and there's more to me than the worst moment in my life. And that's been very moving, you know, and including revelations of one young man who said, you know, I was the result of incest in my family, and I have suffered a real deep low self-esteem over that. So it's not just words, it's, you know, when you share on that level, a lot happens just for externalizing those demons. And I'm going to let Bernard speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, if you could introduce Bernard to us, it's such an honor to have him on, and it's great to also hear about your work too. So,
well, before I go to Bernard, I have a few notes here on self-care I'd like to share.
thank you.
Because it would be sort of sad if the self-care comments came last and didn't get the kind of attention that self-care takes. So I thought the other day, I thought about guilty pleasures. And so I was inspired because I ate a pint of ice cream and it was my wife's. And so what was different for me is I really enjoyed the whole pint of it, because I caught myself kind of eating it fast, you know, like I'm not really eating it and trying to deny it. And so I kind of made a tea ceremony out of my own vice there. I got a lot out of planning my indulgence that way. So thought I'd share that. If you want to develop your vices, you can come talk to me. And then my wife enjoys finding some discipline with social media, because she found there's a way to program your phone that it shuts off after 15 minutes of it. And that makes room for some other activities, such as she's studying the dialogues of David Bohm. David Bohm was a student of Einstein. And you know, for me too, if I walk away from the computer for a moment, and I create some time to write, which I like to do, then that really feeds my self-care too, you know, as a self-expression of being creative. And so it's not just relaxing and not putting out. It's okay to put out if it's something that feeds you. So I wrote this article, Hot Gravy, and lo and behold, the Daily Good website published it. So you can find it there. It's called Hot Gravy. So we're not just sheltering at home, we're sweltering at home here in California because of the fires. And it's really kind of eerie, yellow, dark outside. Some of the street lights are on automatically because of it. So to speak a little bit about sheltering and sweltering at home that way is I allow myself to get up from my desk more, to move from sitting to standing, and just sort of committing viral sacrilege by walking away from the altar of technology here, right? And just enjoy the fact that I can move, and how movement is part of life, and if I engage in it, how life comes back to me. And then, of course, you know, sometimes I find some resistance with needing to work out. I have a stationary bike, and I have lengthy conversations with it. Because I notice if I just go do it, if I don't believe the story of, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or, you know, the air is too bad, I don't want to do it, that I connect with the me then that knows something about riding the bike or has rode the bike before. And so I can make a choice at that moment as to who to believe. And that has some power. Let's see. Personally, I feel helped by water. And so I like to soak and groom. Very basic, huh? Never things I thought I'd share in a professional webinar here. But very basic stuff. And then I have a chair under a few trees where I can look up at the canopies. And then I get to sort of get quiet enough to observe how thought happens, which is a big part of the program, actually. You know? So there's a connection between how I hold my body and the content of my mind, and I get to track that experience when I take my daily moment to sit under the canopies of these trees and just sort of commune with them. So these are some more of the personal expressions of my self-care. And it's probably a first to lead with them rather than to end up at the end of what I have to say, but I thought I'd take that chance. And so Bernard. So Bernard is an African-American man that I've known for a long time. He's been a student of mine, and in my own way, I've been a student of his as well. And Bernard has joined the effort, gainfully employed now. So he's gone back to prison a couple of times, but all by choice. and actually getting paid for it as well.
Yes. So
Bernard, you take it.
All right. Thank you for my introduction, Jacques. Appreciate it. Thank you, James, for having me today. Yes, my name is Bernard Moss. I am formerly incarcerated. I endured 28 years of prison. I did my last 14 years at San Quentin State Prison. I paroled in 2016. I met Jacques in 2002, where he was my mentor. I went through the GRIP program. I was one of the first graduates to graduate the GRIP program, and it was instrumental in changing my life. One of the questions asked was, what has been one of the biggest challenges this pandemic has created? And for me, especially at San Quentin, it's been watching people that I served 14 years with die in prison. It's been very tough just sitting back, not being able to do anything and watch these men die in prison. And when I know there's something that could have been done and nothing was done to help these individuals. So that was very tough for me. On a professional level, being employed now with the GRIP program, when I was hired to work for GRIP, I wasn't hired to facilitate and go back inside prisons and facilitate these materials. So my work week consisted of going to 3 different prisons and working on 4 different yards. And now I've had to do this through correspondence. And this was, I had no computer skills whatsoever being in prison 28 years. So I've had to learn on the fly. I've had to learn I learned Google Drive, Google Docs, all these different things that I've had to learn over the past 6 months. And it's been a learning process for me. So it's been very difficult, but I've been blessed to work for an organization and a staff that are very understanding, that are very patient, and they've helped me along the way. So this is, it's been a blessing for me to have these wonderful people in my life to help me through this. So I appreciate this, and I've made it through, and it's been good. How do I cope? My coping mechanisms have been my grandchildren and my family. They help me out tremendously. It's my me time, and my time just to go out in my backyard and spend with them and just help me to relax and come back to being me. I love to cook, so I can cook for the family, and it just allows me to relax, along with meditating and just being able to find myself. So that's been a real help and an asset over these past 6 months. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, and that's also part of my self-care. I find myself, my wife and I often getting in the car and just taking rides. We stay here in the Bay Area in Antioch, and we just go for rides sometimes 60, 70 miles out, and we'll ride and we'll go find restaurants or somewhere that's open and just do different things. So we'll get in the car and we ride out and just take a day just to do something, just to be alone and just have some me time and some we time. And so these are coping mechanisms and things that help us just keep our sanity, because I think just sitting in the house and just being away from society and people, it's very tough. So yeah, we need that. And another thing that I found that I miss is human contact. And being inside for so long, I realized how important that is to our incarcerated citizens inside. Human contact is so important. I didn't realize that how much it meant for the volunteers who go inside the institutions, and just what it means to the people inside. When I read the letters that come to us from our participants and how much it means to them just to receive our correspondence and to see that we still care about them, and we're taking the time out of our day to write to them individual responses to their homework assignments, it means a lot. And for me to see what that means to them, it helps me to keep going. And sometimes this work, it becomes overwhelming for me. It really does, because my computer skills and just doing this, it's hard for me. But I do the best that I can because I know what it means to the people inside. So yeah, it's fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. So I'm going to keep doing this as long as we have to, as long as there's COVID and they won't let us go back inside the prisons. I will be doing what I need to do because it's self-fulfilling and it helps the people inside the prison system. And that's what we're here for, so that's what this work is about. And I'm going to just do my part and do what I can to keep them happy and to make them feel human inside. So yeah, that's what I want to keep doing. And I just want to say thank you, Jacques, for allowing me to be here today. This is fulfilling. I like this, and yeah, thank you.
Bernard, I seem to remember one of your former cellies went to the board today.
Yes, his family just called me while you were talking. That's why I blanked my screen. He got found suitable. He went yesterday.
Yes, yes.
He was found suitable and he's coming home. So I just told them to let him know I will pick him up when it's time for them to release him out of the gate. I will be there to get him.
Happy,
Yes.
happy. Joy,
Yes.
joy.
Blessing. Yes. Thank you.
That's good news. That gives
Yes,
us
it is.
something to reflect on in the midst of everything going on. Thank you both
Yes.
for your work. I've heard so much about all the work that you all are doing. The two of you are doing and your team are doing this in San Quentin. And there's some pretty amazing statistics that you all have from the programs that you all have been a part of. And so I'm just really thankful for that. And Jacques, I really appreciate you focusing us back to the basics. You know, those things, those guilty pleasures, if you would. Take your time to really enjoy it. And I hope you don't get in any trouble for sharing all the stories from your wife and everything with us on today. But Bernard, thank you so much for being a part of it. And, you know, the thing I appreciate about both of you all is your deep passion for the work that you all do. And all the panelists on our call have such a deep passion for this work, and to hear about how you all are weathering this pandemic is really insightful. And I'm certain that it's helping everyone who's participating in this, even those who are watching this in the rebroadcast or playing this back. These are really insightful thoughts as we continue to serve those individuals who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. Well, today we have a real treat in Dr. Robert Evans. He's our respondent today. And I just want to give us some thoughts and some more wisdom and kind of, a kind of culmination of all the wisdom that we've been getting. Dr. Evans is a culturally competent psychologist and licensed clinical professional counselor with nearly 20 years of experience. He has a passion for helping individuals and families recognize thoughts and behaviors that hinder progress. And not only does Dr. Evans do amazing work through his counseling practice, but he also has a number of years working directly in the criminal justice system. And so Dr. Evans, it's such a treat to have you on today. And tell us a little bit about the work that you've done in the past in the criminal justice system, but more importantly, give us some further insights, some things that we need to keep in mind. Respond to everything that you've heard, so to speak. It's a pleasure to have you today on our webinar, my friend.
Oh man, I thank you so much for having me, man. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, I'm constantly working with my clients daily, but I took the time out for this, and they are very understanding. I appreciate everybody who has been a part of this, all of the panelists. You know, everyone dropped some great jewels. I was jotting some things down. I have to say that I'm most impressed by Bernard, man. Bernard, I want to tip my hat off to you. You know, you are the picture of resiliency. And, you know, very rarely do we have those success stories working in the criminal justice system. I can remember all of the success stories that I had because they were few and far in between. And so, you know, you represent that. And resiliency is my favorite word. Dr. Ozawa-de Silva, he talked about it. He talked about resiliency. And, you know, I believe that it's so important for us to understand the importance of that word. But I wanted to just touch on a couple of things that I heard. You know, I think that Miss Butler, her kicking it off, I mean, she really did give us some great insight on what's going on today. I think one of the things that we learned immediately is that there's a difference between the have and the have-nots. That's a statement that we hear a lot. But what's really been exposed through this whole situation with COVID is our lack of preparation, right? Our lack of preparation from a nation's perspective, from the governmental perspective, individually, from the agencies that we have in place for this population. As you indicated, I worked for 14 years with CSOSA, same place Ms. Butler works. And I worked in the mental health unit with guys who had suffered from co-occurring disorders, mental health challenges as well as substance use issues. And, I still have my finger a little bit on that population just because I'm still connected with the people who still work there. And from my understanding, COVID devastated the population in DC. One of the things that we didn't talk about was the mass release that took place from a lot of individuals who were released because of what was going on in the system, and there was no preparation for it. First off, before COVID, there was already a lack of resources, right? For individuals who wanted to offer services and find resources and services. I'm sorry, something just happened here. Someone tried to call me.
No, we can still hear you.
Yeah, see, let me unplug my phone. I have my phone plugged in and try to interrupt me. But there was already a lack of resources, but now COVID hits and it really did expose what the gaps and what we need in place for this population. You're talking about individuals who already have broken bridges with their family members, who didn't really have a place to go, who would have loved to have gone to halfway houses, but these places are not taking these people in. Shelters were not taking people in. So they had absolutely no place to go, right? Then you have parole officers and probation officers who are responsible for keeping track of these people and have no way to get in touch with them. I mean, it really did expose a lot. I know people who had several clients, several returning people who were formerly incarcerated who passed away because of this. Absolutely no place to go. So lack of preparation is, I would say, the biggest thing that's been exposed. Some other things that people touched on. I love what Dr. Verdun said about really choosing the best version of yourself. One of the things that I've done during this pandemic, and we'll get, I definitely want to touch on self-care because I think that's really important. I want to spend a lot of time on that. One of the things that I did was I took a month off, which I've never done, right? I'm one of those guys that work every day, my birthday, all of that. But I took a month off and I spent a lot of that time just dedicated to self-care, spent time writing my book. And within that book, I talk about adversity. I talk about resiliency. I talk about self-care and all of those things. But one of the things that he touched on was really discovering the best version of yourself, or deciding who you want the best version of yourself to be. So when you're choosing to, you know what, I want to work out now. I want to exercise now. I want to try some of these self-care tips that people put in the chat. We have been busy conditioning ourselves to be a certain way. We may have been conditioning ourselves to relax, maybe sleep in, maybe, do the things that are opposite of self-care. And now we have to recondition ourselves. And so what that means is we're going to be talking ourselves out of getting on that treadmill, right? We're going to be talking ourselves out of running that mile or getting on that bike, because that's just not what we're comfortable with or what we're used to. And we have to choose the better version of ourselves every time, right? It's a conscious effort to do. So I really like that he brought that up. But I wanted to really talk about different ways for self-care. I think exercise is, to me, of course, my favorite, right? It really does, it's medicine. When you're talking about walking, biking, I went and bought a bicycle and rode. And, anything that you can do to exercise. And then after you warm your body up, you want to stretch and you want to get some really deep breathing. You want to breathe into your belly, some diaphragmatic breathing where you're breathing into your belly and maximizing the amount of oxygen that you can take in. But I love to do that every day after I do some exercise. And that was another thing that I did, right? So again, just using the word conditioning. One of the things that was exposed for me during COVID is, man, we have really been conditioning ourselves to be used to face-to-face contact or used to being able to go directly to a store to get something, where now you have to be online, order online, or you have to order your food online or talk to someone on the phone versus go see them. And so one of the things that I recognized early on when the quarantine started, when they shut down Maryland and said, look, y'all can't come out. I said, well, you know, prior to COVID, I was exercising like maybe 3 days a week, 3 to 4 days. Now I'm going to condition myself to exercise every day, right? Because what I want to do is to be prepared for the next time there's something that catches us off guard. How are we going to prepare ourselves for the next crisis? Are we going to be unprepared? Are we not going to think ahead? So those things are really exposed. When you talk about the criminal justice system, nobody thought about, okay, you know what? If we have a pandemic that shuts all movement down, how are we going to respond to that? What are we going to do? There was a complete loss. A lot of people, and you know, it's my understanding and talking to the people that still work at CSOSA, a lot of people in DC who you're seeing on the news is doing the shooting are people that are on supervision because there's no accountability. Because who's in place to look after these people, right? Because the officers are not coming to work. They got to virtually try to find these people. A lot of people didn't have a place to go, so they left, went to Maryland or other states, Virginia. They're all over the place. So that lack of preparation and lack of foresight is the biggest thing that has been exposed, and that we need to now be able to think ahead, you know. So I think, you know, when I was at CSOSA, they were doing a lot of trainings on, you know, the things that we've already had happen, you know, attacks, shootings, things of that nature, but nobody thought about what didn't happen yet, right? So that's the kind of thing that we need to think individually, from an agency perspective, those companies that we're working for, from a governmental and national perspective, what hasn't come yet, and how can we prepare for that? Because, you know, it's not enough to just be prepared for what we already know. We got to think of what we don't know, right? You know, I think that, what else? Oh, another thing, and, you know, that's been exposed. And I did a WebEx for Howard County on the subject of COVID and how it's impacted us culturally. And one of the things that's been exposed is from an African-American perspective, Blacks have been smashed by COVID, right? You know, twice as likely to die nationally. You know, every 100,000, 35 of us die, as opposed to Caucasians 13, Latinos 14, right? In some areas like where we have in Kansas, 7 times more likely to die, right? In DC, 6 times more likely to die. So it has been devastating to the Black community. And so while it's been very equalizing because a lot of people have been suffering through the same thing, it's also been very polarizing. So it's you know, these last several months with COVID have been very, very enlightening. And it's an opportunity for us to really take advantage. I like, again, going back to what Dr. De Silva said about paying attention to the positive. One of the things that Ms. Butler said was something that eases her and makes her feel comfortable is actually plugging into the news and keeping up on the news. And for me, I had to unplug from the news, right? Because one of the things that we have to be mindful of is the vicarious and the complex trauma that's continuing to take place as a result of what we're all experiencing. Because it's not just the returning the individuals who were previously incarcerated who are suffering. It's those officers, those people that are out there, frontliners who want to help, who can't help, and constantly being exposed to the violence and the devastation can also cause trauma for us. So for me, I've had to unplug at times and not tune into the news, not tune into politics and all of those things. And so, you know, I really believe in taking time for yourself. Again, self-care is number one, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we absolutely can't take care of anyone else. You know, and working in the criminal justice system, I worked in a residential treatment program. That's, again, another thing. These programs are no longer. Individuals who were suffering from addictions, they were struggling to get into programs before COVID. Now they can't get into programs. So you're looking at individuals who are suffering on multiple levels, who don't have the resources to go to. But when I was working in that program, I would tell the guys, because they wanted to leave out of the program, they were anxious to go because they had families. I would say, you know, I always refer to when you get on the plane, you know, and they always talk about when the airbags deploy, who do you put on the mask first, yourself or your child? And oftentimes they would say, I'm putting it on my child, right? But I had to help them understand that if we don't put it on ourselves first and take care of us first, then everybody may go, us and the child.
That's right.
So it's imperative that we take care of ourselves. You know, when it comes down to those individuals who are on the front line and you guys doing that hard work, of course, the people on the panel, they get it. So they're doing what it takes, but not everybody knows the importance of taking care of themselves. So one of the things that I harp on with my private practice and the individuals that I see is health and wellness. It's the exercise, it's the nutrition. Everything that we put in our body is medication. Everything that we expose ourselves to is medication. Just like watching your child's face and smiling, that's medication, right? Because it's interacting with those chemicals in your brain that make you feel good. And you want that again, you yearn for that again. So we have to be careful of how we're medicating ourselves, right? Because I believe in healthy self-medication. And so that's one of the things that I definitely wanted to touch on today. I believe that everybody, you know, hit the nail on the head with self-care. And I'll turn over the mic. If you have any other questions, you know, let me know.
Yeah, well, Dr. Evans, thank you so much. I mean, you hit the nail on the head yourself, you know, preparation and our lack of preparation for this moment. And, you know, out of all the things, I mean, you said so many key nuggets of wisdom, but that foresight piece is huge, man. It is huge. Like, you know, we're so worried about what do we do in this moment, but how do we prepare for the moment that's yet to come?
Yeah.
And really beginning to think through that, especially as we prepare for ourselves and managing and being more resilient in the future, and as we continue to do the work of criminal justice. Now, some of you on the that are participating in this webinar may have some questions for our panelists, may have questions for Dr. Evans, or just questions in general for anyone, maybe some things in your area. And we're going to turn it back over to Dr. Brock. She's going to come. She's been keeping our chat going and helping us get connected to some of the resources that's there. But Dr. Brock, you know, help us out here. How can we get into?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of great commenting going on and thanking people, and the good news about Bernard's friend was like, yeah, hooray. I think that really lifted everybody's spirit in a wonderful way. And one of the questions was to you, Bernard, and that was, what can those of us outside do to support and encourage people who are inside our prisons bearing this even worse isolation from COVID?
I don't really know. I think letters, supporting organizations that are going inside, well, not going inside right now, but are supporting organizations that are doing correspondence courses and supporting individuals inside through correspondence is really big right now, because supporting people inside, right, there are very few organizations that can support people without grants and without funding right now. So funding is real big. So anybody that's trying to still support their organization through the COVID-19, it's really helpful to help support those organizations right now. So,
thank you. That's really good to keep in mind.
thank you.
Yeah. When Jacques first told me you had all gone to correspondence courses, I didn't really understand the significance of receiving mail inside. Right. Yeah, and have your name called. Right,
and a lot of guys sit right by the bars just waiting to hear their name at 4 o'clock when the officers come by to pass out mail. And it's so uplifting just to hear your name called.
Yeah. Jacques, I wanted to ask you a couple of more questions about the program GRIP, because I think it's a little unusual in the way it does its work, but starting with a year inside with people and helping them, as you say, get out before you're released.
Yeah.
Right.
Leave the prison before you get out. Right.
Yeah. And I'm late on, the numbers of the people who've gone through your program and the ones who've gotten out and all that. Those are numbers I heard from you a couple of years ago, and I'm sure there's an update on them and how many prisons you're working in.
Yeah, yeah, we're working in 5 prisons, and we're seeing about 450 students. And next year, that we're going to further expand, and we're actively trying out and studying ways to replicate at this point.
And how many of you graduated so far? Do you have a count?
Yeah, these are our bragging rights, so I learned to remember them. We had 913 people have graduated, and 326, or should I say 27, Bernard.
That's right.
Have been released by the Board of Parole hearings.
Yeah.
Because they're all lifers.
Lifers, right.
Violent defenders / lifers. Who, by the way, you know, in terms of who could be released, right, have a below 3% recidivism rate and a 0.3 if they do our program. So what we're vouching for now is this whole group of people. There's 35,000 lifers. Isn't that shameful in the state of California? And we call it earned release. And we try to focus the government, and this is a large job, to not only do early release, but to also focus on earned release. Because, you know, why try to be tough on justice if all that's needed is to just get smart on it? And so the whole COVID debacle because you imagine any place that has 2,200 infectious people, and it's like your mind just quits, right? So yeah, we've definitely woken up to a bit of a active campaign that we're thinking about in terms of really vouching for these folks that you could call our own life row, right? We have death row, and now we have life row in California. And by the way, only one person came back out of the 326 on a nonviolent offense. It's a drug sale.
So,
yeah,
that's out of all the people in your program, the graduates who have been paroled, you've had one actually have to return to prison.
In 8 years, yeah.
In 8 years. So that's a pretty amazing recidivism rate.
Yeah, because, you know, it cost $81,000 to house a prisoner in California. And so if you do that times 326, then you're well above $26 million that you could save or that you could spend on bigger fire departments, or, you know, other things that make a lot of sense in all these crises that we're in right now.
Yeah. So given that, I think Dr. Evans's point about foresight, I thought was also a really important insight into trying to think forward so that we aren't trying to recover from things that blindsided us and that we didn't expect. And certainly pandemics were not something that should have been a surprise. I mean, we, you know, just 4 years ago I think it was 4 years ago, we had the Ebola outbreak. And then we had Zika from mosquitoes. And I mean, there've been, and of course, some of us remember the AIDS epidemic, which was a kind of pandemic. So it was a major crisis in a lot of places. So I would ask all of you to think about what might be some things we might be looking forward to that would enable us to be better at the criminal justice work that our country wants to do, that we may not be thinking about now, but we really need to be thinking forward toward.
Mm-hmm. That's for anybody?
Yeah, that's for anybody. Jump in if you've got a thought.
You know, I think a lot of people are holding on to the hope that we're going to go back to the way things were, and they're operating like that. I think we need to look forward to if they don't go back to the way things were, and how are we going to handle that? What is it going to look like if officers have to virtually meet with people who are on supervision? What is that going to look like in the future? Let's prepare for that. Let's actually make sure that we're ready for that, instead of hoping that, oh, we're going to eventually go back, because we can, I would love for it to go back, but if it doesn't, then what?
Mm-hmm.
If I could add, being a former practitioner and seeing where we are right now with COVID-19, I think this situation has highlighted the need for the criminal justice system to meet clients where they are, directly in communities. When you think about specifically parole and probation, clients have to report to supervision offices, which most times, if you just think of downtown District of Columbia, we have clients that are homed throughout the city, northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest, but most, if not all of our field office locations are closely centered downtown. Dr. Evans, you know this, a lot of our former field sites that were more so in the community have closed. And so they've been now more moving into the city, the center of the city, but most clients cannot afford and do not live in the center of the city. So to me, going back to putting more resources like supervision offices or touchdown stations within communities, making it easier and accessible for clients to reach those, as well as connecting clients with resources that are, one, available to them. And when we're thinking about placing people on probation, thinking about the capacity of communities. Do these communities have the resources that they need to help these clients rehabilitate? If you're letting someone come home from jail or prison and you're putting them right back in the community that they came from, which was already resource deprived, how are you then expecting them to successfully rehabilitate back into society? So I think it's really an adjustment for the criminal justice system to look at how can we better meet clients where they are with what they need to truly be successful.
Yeah. Jacques, you had a question about, we referenced the Navajo, and could you expand a little more on that reference about tribe?
Yes, I can. You know, I think I also said that accountability, which is of course the buzzword for all of us rehabilitators, accountability emerges out of the experience of meaningful relationship. Like, we're all talking to each other on this Zoom thing because our relationship is meaningful enough to be accountable to each other, period. And that's not different, you know, with prisoners. However, particularly with lifers, you know, they've burned a lot of bridges over time in terms of relationships. It's been harder to maintain. And so it becomes really important to set up a context that not only has a strong curriculum, but calls people by their name, by their real name, calls them back into wanting to be accountable. And like Bernard was saying, they are very grateful, you know, and it's a real showdown of the community through the correspondence format that we're trying to, you know, keep that whole resocialization piece alive.
Yeah. Brendan, I remember several years ago, you're talking about your interest in how to secularize religious practices that you have found useful in your work in prison. Mm. And I know Jacques also uses mindfulness in some of what he does. I think we'll have some people who are chaplains in the group watching today. Could you talk a little bit about what you meant by secularizing religious practices and how you use them?
Sure, Rita. In the program that we set up, and we've tried to share these resources with other programs. The program we set up in Georgia, I mean, we do have contemplative practice as a core component of the program. A lot of other programs are doing that also, integrating mindfulness and yoga. We're very careful to introduce these as secular programs, and they're also introduced in an academic context. And we think that people who are in these programs really seem to benefit from them. In fact, one of the programs we've introduced called Compassionate Integrity Training, which is a compassion and mindfulness program. We were very fortunate to have people who are on the inside becoming certified facilitators in that program and then teaching it to each other. So that's really encouraging. So we have like fully certified instructors who are, still incarcerated, because we have a lot of people serving long sentences too. As Jacques has mentioned, we have a lot of lifers in our programs too. So it's very empowering. I will say that one of the ways in which contemplative practice has changed, and mindfulness and yoga have been changing, is to become more trauma informed. So I think that anybody wanting to bring these practices to the inside, they should look to how these practices are changing to be more trauma informed. Because when I went in for the first time to teach meditation in a prison, it was about 9 years ago. And I didn't know anything about that. And I just tried to teach it the same way I'd been teaching it on the outside for 10 years. And, I had a great group of women sitting around me, and we went into the meditation. I said, focus on your breath. And one of them just halfway through stood up and ran out of the room. And I thought, oh my God, what happened? She came back. I said, did you dislike it? Did you hate it? What was going on? She said, no, I love this. I really want this state of inner peace that you're talking about. But the instant I close my eyes, I just feel this panic, almost this panic, and I got to get up and run out. And that started me on my past 8-year journey of studying trauma and trauma psychotherapy, trauma physiology. And that's changed the way we teach meditation now. We've learned that closing your eyes, not exactly a safe thing to do. Sometimes don't feel safe that way. Focusing on the breath. If you've suffered from trauma, and even people who haven't, they just, because of illness or whatever reason, the breath is intimately connected with our parasympathetic and sympathetic activation. So focusing on the breath, a lot of people, it triggers a panic attack for them, where they just feel uncertain. So we changed to much more body-based approaches, like some of the things I was sharing earlier, to create a sense of safety in the body and the mind first. Then you can meditate, then you can do yoga, then you can do lots of things. Because sometimes when we try to do those, people say, I can't meditate, I can't do yoga. It's not because they don't want to do it mentally, it's because there's something in their body that just doesn't feel happy, doesn't feel safe. So you've got to make the body feel safe first. And people have mentioned authentic connection, and that was also a huge thing. Us not just going in to try and teach a technique, but try to get to know the people there and listen to their story, understand their lives. And then that changed our whole relationship. And then they were willing to, to kind of go on this meditation journey with us. So I think both of those things are really important: the human connection and being trauma informed and resilience informed.
I think we have time maybe for one more question, which is also to the entire panel, which is, as we're thinking forward, how can we think about criminal justice in new ways? For example, in the ways that restorative justice movements or transformative justice movements are thinking that might change some of the practices we currently are doing that are harmful or became dysfunctional under COVID.
Yeah, and maybe also, if I can piggyback, what have we learned, if anything, from the murder of George Floyd? And how does the call for police reform extend into reform of the criminal justice system? Would love to hear from the African American representative.
Yeah, LaToshia has a background in law enforcement, isn't that right? And what would you say to what Jacques just said?
Well, one, I think there are two parts to this for me. as a practitioner of the field, being that I've worked in community corrections, for the last 30 years or so, the community correction system has moved into more of a rehabilitative and intervention model of supervision, where we have incorporated providing returning citizens with resources, interventions, realizing that we cannot be overly punitive and law enforce our way out of the problem of what it takes for someone to actually enter the criminal justice system. As it relates to the social justice dynamics of what has happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, I mean, I can go on and on for years of all of the persons who we all have seen have the unfortunate outcome of police brutality. I think that's something that we've all known to exist for years. I think it's actually going to take a good, hard look at a lot of policies that have been put into place of how the criminal justice system operates, how police officers are trained, of how they police Black and brown bodies in communities. And I think it's just a large conversation, how mass incarceration and prison laws have disproportionately been impacted in underprivileged African-American and Latino communities, the school to prison pipeline that has been created. I mean, we could go on and on for years about really having to not just defund police, but really reform the criminal justice system, because that's what it's going to take. It's a huge conversation. And I think it's going to take a lot of undoing a lot of things that have happened. It should take a lot of expungement of crimes off several thousands of persons' criminal records. I mean, it's a conversation that's so layered in depth. I don't think people are really ready to have it, because it would really impact the prison industry and the criminal justice system that we know. There are so many countries out here that have successful criminal justice systems,
Right.
less mass incarceration, less recidivism rates, less mass shootings than the United States. But because the prison industry is such a big moneymaker, it doesn't change. And so I would hope that going into this new election, we all vote like our lives depend on it, because generations to come are going to be impacted. And it's really something that we would have to delve into, but we'd have to, at all levels of the criminal justice system, not just policing, but the courts, but corrections and community corrections, we all have to be willing to say, we need to reform every layer of the system. And it's just a deep conversation that I don't know if the United States is ready to have, but I hope with the upcoming election, we say that we are ready to have it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we just had our benediction. We have just a minute if anyone else wanted to add anything to what LaToshia just said.
I just want.
Yes. Okay, Brendan, and then Robert, and then Jacques, you can finish.
I just wanted to say I really appreciated what LaToshia just said, and I think it also addresses a question that appeared in the chat that Maria Foster put about how do we shift the narrative from one of revenge and punishment to one of restorative justice. And I think that, you know, LaToshia pointed at one answer, potential answer to that, which is we need to think more from a systems level and a reform. You know, it's natural for victims of violent crimes and their family members to just focus on that incident and seek, you know, a kind of, you know, seek a solution through punishment or revenge. But as a society, is that what we want? You know, is that working for us? I think we need the reform she's talking about.
And then Robert.
I believe what Ms. Butler said was awesome. You know, it's an onion conversation, as one of my friends would say, is layers upon layers of attention that needs to be, you know, brought to the whole thing. It needs to be really a complete shutdown and rebuilding of the whole thing, right? But, you know, as far as the what now, because we can get into the whole historical aspect of how we got to this point, but the what now is, what do we do now? And, you know, being in CSOSA and just knowing how policing is in DC, one of the things I think we need to really take a look at is just the hiring practices, just making sure that we are getting the right people in place. Because, you know, we can train people all day, but if we're not training the right people, then the training is just going to go out of the window. That's one of the things that we did at CSOSA was train, and more training. And we would still have some of the same issues because we weren't training the right people. So I think we just really need to take a look at how we are hiring and building things going forward. That's going to be really important. And it's just really about us being just understanding that we all connect from a humanity perspective.
Mhm.
You know, when we look at the atrocities that have taken place, a lot of things are just inhumane, right? It's like, it's not human to do that, but we need to be connecting on a human perspective to understand that we're all connected and be able to approach from that perspective, because, you know, it's really about implicit bias that just comes out in all of these events. And we're not training on that. We're not training on how did you get to become the person that you are and what do we do about that? And that's going to be something very difficult to change. What we can change is who we're putting in position, just like who we're going to vote for, right?
So Jacques, did you also want to say something?
Well, it's kind of what COVID is teaching us in terms of hand washing. I can no longer wash my hands off of you, off of your fate. I wash my hands for your fate. My freedom is in your hands exactly where it belongs. So COVID can teach us, right? That the mystery of the other can be humanized, like Brad was just saying, right?
Yeah. And Bernard, did you want to say anything?
I just, when this subject was brought up, it just brought me to the thought of how sad it is that the humans inside of California prisons, the fact that they are all censored from even talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. They can't even talk about it without being threatened with gang validations. So that's just sad that we're not being an inmate in California. If you're African American and you talk about Black Lives Matter, you're threatened with being considered a gang member. So that is so sad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a brother who's at CTF Soledad who was pulled out of his cell at 2:45 in the morning and handcuffed, and his cell was stripped and all of his property was taken looking for Black Lives Matter material behind the George Floyd incident.
Yeah.
Yes.
Extremely unfortunate.
Yes.
Wow, thank you so much. It's good to know that. We're a little bit over time, but I think it was worth it to hear that. And I want to thank everyone for a fabulous 90 minutes of insight and sobering realities and good advice about how to survive what we're doing right now. And this last conversation we just had is interesting because our next webinar in October will be moral resilience for social movement activists during COVID-19. So I think it's an appropriate segue into that topic. What is the work that we're all going to have to hang in there together in movements that push the work? How are we going to hang in there for the next 30 or 40 years? This is not going to be something we're going to fix even in two presidential terms. So thank you all very, very much. And we hope the rest of you had a great time with this event too, or learned a lot. And we invite you back next month. Stay tuned. You'll get an email for the date and time of the next event. Thank you all very much and have a great weekend, everyone.